This is the unrestricted free agent.
The Jimbo Fisher stuff. Were you in the room the other day when he threw?
I was. Part of the reason we had so much fun being Clemson was because we used to talk a lot of shit to them and they couldn't handle it.
You feel fine, but your hands are shaking.
Coach Spurrier couldn't give a damn.
I want to take these athletes and mentor them.
Why can't the Gamecocks win at the SEC tournament?
It's so sunny all the time, so hot.
Too sunny.
Too sunny.
Fans are going to be fans, and people who understand the sport are going to talk sports.
With some weird dynamics.
It's going to be painful, but I think at the end of the day, we'll be stronger people for it.
Is exactly right. Trying to get stronger on a Friday morning. Happy Friday morning to you. As I pick up a coffee cup here, only one cup in, so I'll probably take a few more sips than usual this morning. How annoying is that? Happy Friday, Tim and UFAs. DC started this morning at 7:37. Well done, sir. Jason in as well, asking if I watched the NHL draft, and I replied, I didn't know there was an NHL draft. There might be that might be the two most foreign words to me in combination in sports to even fathom to watch the NHL draft. I mean, even I've gotten to the point where the NFL draft, I'm like, all right, let's move this thing along. Why is the first round a 3-hour production or more? I'm just getting old that way. And DC said he missed most of the show yesterday. Did enjoy hearing the last 15 minutes. He said it made me think about the NIL stuff. In my opinion, I think there should be some kind of limit so schools aren't just bidding on recruits. Interesting. We did have South Carolina Associate Athletic Director Hillary Cox on, and she had a lot of interesting information out there about her job being in charge of NIL and now how it has shifted in the state of South Carolina specifically, where the schools are now allowed to facilitate deals and the whole thing, and probably play a clip from her talking about the one big time example that shows you the 180 degrees they've had to shift. She used to work in compliance, so it used to be her job to say what you really couldn't do a lot of times. She had a great example yesterday. Double R, how about this? Weighing in as well. Good to see a new name popping up on the YouTube live stream. Says, good morning. Keep up the good work, Tim. Good show yesterday. Appreciate that. YouTube, Twitter, and Facebook up and rolling on the video side. Podbean has the audio only during the live portion of the show from 8 to 10 every Monday through Friday. And again, today's show might be a little bit shorter. Taking the family off to the beach and no shows at all next week. A good time of the year to take a week to do that. And then we'll be right back on the 18th, the first day of SEC Media Days, by the way, and full college football straight on through from there. But it's not like we don't have anything to talk about today. Just trying to give you the schedule there. Gamecock baseball leading the way for us today, adding another transfer. This time it's Southern Miss infielder, played second base. Will McGillis is his name, and some pretty solid numbers. 16 home runs, 51 RBI. The on-base percentage, I think, up to about 400 or so. Will be really interesting to see how he fits in the mix with Gamecock baseball, how all the transfers do. Now, 9 transfers in. I think it was 6 transfers out. I think it's just going to be the trend. 9 transfers into a college baseball program is not amazingly disruptive, not close to what it can be to a basketball roster. Like Frank Martin, I think, had 8 last year, right? So the 9 coming in, not an absurd number. It is, I think it's where we are in 2022, man. Where college sports are, baseball specifically, and then you get down to the specific place the Gamecocks are in, and Mark Kingston having missed the NCAA tournament for the second time last year. Carolina finishing a game under 500 overall. Unacceptable for a program this time a decade ago that was playing for its 3rd straight national championship. So a lot of expectations for sure, and we'll see what happens. Holly weighing in from Maryland this morning. All right, we're all over the place. Good to see the show's stretching far and wide this morning. So Maryland just popped in my head. It reminded me of the Shane Beamer pipeline. It seems like that going up to the D.C., Maryland, Virginia area. And he came in, of course, with the Frank Beamer name being so valued up there. Mentioned that was going to be something he's trying to mine, something he's trying to get going. And it seems to be the case for sure. But no immediate Gamecock football recruiting news to get to this morning. Spidey joined us yesterday, very vocal, loved it, loved all the comments, appreciate that. Good morning to you as well, sir. So I mentioned the headline for Gamecock baseball. Of course, Mark Kingston took over for his former North Carolina teammate, Chad Holbrook. That was the odd thing yesterday that I saw pop up, that Charleston now looking into its baseball program. They hired a Columbia-based law firm to do an investigation. They have offered players anonymity to talk to them, said the school will never know if you talk to them or not. Something to keep an eye on for sure. Want to be very fair here and deal with facts only. Those are the only facts that I have. And interested to see. Might have my buddy Scott Eisberg from down in Charleston on the day. He might know a few more details at this point. I don't know if there are a lot of details to be known, though. And this is not the first time there has been smoke, might be the best way to put that. Some extra stuff going around Chad Holbrook in the College of Charleston. The former coach, Matt Heath, ended up suing the school, said he was wrongfully fired, and that I guess it was the athletic director and Chad Holbrook. The accusation was they had basically been scheming to get him out of there. So that is where that is today as well. Talking about news from a South Carolina standpoint, baseball specific. The St. Louis Cardinals end up knocking off the Braves last night, avoided a 4-game sweep in Atlanta, 3-2 the final score in 11 innings. That weird, hey, the old international, I consider it more like a little league rule. I think we call it the international rule. I think that's the official name, where in extra innings, you start the inning with somebody on second base. You just send somebody out from the dugout. Hey, head on out, man. And the Cardinals end up scoring a run. The Braves did not. And Atlanta loses there. Mets won last night. So Braves drop back to 3.5 games in the NL East. Spencer Strider, former Clemson standout, really the headline guy for the first time ever. I think the Braves moved from Milwaukee in 1966, first time ever, 9 up, or the first 9 outs in the game, strikeouts. Crazy. And got some great college football stuff to get to. Baylor picked to win the Big 12. We'll get more into that as we roll on this morning. But Jason, I believe you called for Mr. Eisberg there, and it looks like he's getting all set up in his camp. We got the camp carousel going in Team Eisberg right now. Scotty, morning, sir. You hear me all right?
I hear you good. You hear me all right?
Absolutely perfect, man. You have already done the camp drop off this morning.
I've done one. Now I got to go back and do the other. But I'm stopped and pulled over in the Harris Teeter parking lot right next to the one camp, and I'll go get the other kid, and then I'll go bring her to hers. So yeah, needless to say, it's been a whirlwind. Your 8 a.m. show, man. It's a little tougher for the working dad, but I'm sure it's working out. You got the rest of your day free, which is nice.
And I don't even know if I'm going to make it all the way to 10 o'clock this morning. The beach pressure, the pressure to get on the road for the beach, to beat the 2-year-old nap to get there in time. That's where I'm at. That's what I'm going on.
Oh, today. Are you going to the Over the Hill gang house?
Absolutely, man. We'll be down in South Myrtle Beach-ish. Should be interesting times. Good times for a 9 and 7-year-old to run around the beach, and the 2-year-old, we can't handle him. He dominates us. So yeah, I'm hoping the beach will wear his butt out.
You went from man-to-man defense to zone defense. That's not an easy thing to do. I don't have to do that, thankfully, right now.
No, this dude is more like you got to have a boxing one. Like I think I got to recruit the 9 and 7-year-old as well to play, and they don't want to have anything to do with it, man. What's going on with the College of Charleston? What's the deal?
Yeah, so I don't know how serious it is. Obviously, they hired a lawyer to investigate. I don't know how serious it is, just because the college is also like one of these schools that's kind of they've been smacked around with investigations before. They've done this before, so I don't know if they're just trying to get ahead of the curve and get it figured out before more investigation needs to be done or whatever it may be. But I posted an email yesterday that I got from a former player, and this Dirk Eidelet is the attorney. He's a workforce attorney, some sort of a I don't even know what you call it, a
Labor law kind of guy.
labor law kind of guy, yeah. And he just basically said he sent out this email to all the Cougars and said, "I'd like to speak to you. I'd like to ask you. I'll keep you anonymous and whatnot, but I'd like to, I have some questions for you." So, for the newspaper, the Post and Courier is reporting it dealt with some sort of a team meeting when they were in a big slump. I think they lost 6 of 7 early in the year this year. A bunch of them were unexpected losses. I think they dropped the whole series to High Point. And beyond that, I just don't know. I don't know what the whole thing will entail. But you got to remember that this is a baseball program that Chad Holbrook took over because of a controversy, much like this. They were investigating Matt Heath, who was the 2-year coach after Monty Lee, for a toxic baseball environment and all sorts of things. Verbal abuse and whatnot. Well, Holbrook gets the job. Matt Heath ends up, suing the College of Charleston, saying that he was wrongfully terminated. It was just kind of a setup by Matt Roberts, the AD, to hire his close friend and, groomsman Chad Holbrook, which, the courts agreed with Matt Heath, and the college had to pay him $350K. So, I think there's certainly a bit of the College of Charleston that's like, all right, we got to be, on the up and up and careful about any complaint that's filed. Now, you got to determine whether this is just a disgruntled former player that wanted to bring something up, or this was seriously something that needs to be looked at. And that's what we're going to find out when this investigation is done. But in the grand scheme, this is really like the 4th major investigation at the College of Charleston since 2014. 2014 was Doug Wojcik whole controversy with the basketball program. Then 2016 was the women's basketball program. Candace Jackson, the coach, was running the team over the bridge back and forth and just like, tyrant kind of stuff. And one of the girls literally was having, like kidney failure. And she told the rest of the team, no, you carry her down to the bottom of the bridge instead of getting an ambulance. And then the girl had all sorts of issues later. She sued for negligence. And then the Matt Heath situation was, a pretty big deal. And now this is the 4th investigation, that they're bringing in an external lawyer for in, the last 8 years, which is kind of insane.
So what's your take on it at this point? What's your feel? Any idea?
No, I have no idea. I always thought Holbrook was a player's coach. Players really like playing for Holbrook. I've never heard a complaint about him before. I really have not heard a complaint about Holbrook before. I don't, he doesn't seem like the tyrant type. Matt Heath did. Matt Heath had there was a crazy look in Matt Heath's eye when he'd look at you. He was a bit unhinged. When the wires got crossed up there, we saw him in game action get tossed a couple of times where you're like, the wires are crossed on this guy. With Holbrook, I don't see it. I don't see it with Holbrook. So I don't know. I get along great with Chad. I've got no issues. We text relatively often, and whenever I need something, no problem. And he's fine. So I don't know. I mean, part of me says maybe it is just a disgruntled former player, which happens a lot. Another part of me says it's serious enough that they hired an external lawyer to look into this thing. So that, that can be pretty serious. Lawyers don't come cheap when that meter's running.
What's verbal abuse by a coach? Do we know? Like, where does it cross the line? If you're telling me that Frank Martin was within the lines, and I don't know what crosses the line. You know what I'm
No,
saying?
I completely. I mean, that was the story with Doug Wojcik in 2014. I mean, Doug Wojcik wasn't hitting players or anything. He was screaming and yelling, and I mean, the F-bomb seemed to be the favored word, and he was up in faces and yelling and everything like that. I mean, I think it was part of it was how it was perceived because they were coming off of Bobby Cremins, who was the nicest guy in the world. It was Country Club. And then Doug Wojcik, who's a former naval intelligence officer, rolls in there, and just a completely different style that took the players completely by surprise. I mean, it just took them like, well, we're not used to this.
But also, they didn't win very much, correct? Or they didn't win.
No, they won. Yeah, no, I mean, Wojcik won 23 games no, they won.
Okay.
Yeah, they weren't a terrible team under Doug Wojcik. They were relatively decent. But I mean, it was just a totally different lifestyle the players were living than they were with Bobby Cremins. I mean, it's completely different. But I had so many people tell me if that Doug Wojcik thing happened at the Citadel, nothing. That would not have been an issue. But ultimately, in this day and age, and with mental health concerns and suicide rates are high, and all the things that contribute to that, there is a new line you've got to walk, and if it's not going to be comfortable for players, then I guess theoretically, it's wrong. I mean, I think there's a difference between tough coaching and going personal with it. I mean, with Doug Wojcik, it went personal. The players were saying it went personal. He was talking about their families, or he was talking about personal issues that were beyond, you didn't make that 3-pointer, or you didn't make the cut where I told you to make the cut.
And I don't know
what the right.
That was always Frank Martin's explanation when he was asked about when is it too much. He mentioned it was when it gets personal, and he never got personal. To me, what I saw during
it did get personal. What, didn't Martin get suspended for a game or two for? You remember in that huddle? Was it Kotsar he went off on, or somebody? He did get suspended.
Yeah, I think that was more of a volume issue and a vocabulary issue at that point, as opposed to offending his player. Do you know what I'm saying? And also, Frank is the best at doing that, getting after a guy publicly during a game, the whole thing. And then I think coming back around in the locker room or later on or the next day or whatever, and repairing the relationship might not be the right way to put that, but making sure they see the other side of him, and that it's not just, tyrant coach and player. It is human being that acts one way as a coach, but is a completely different type of human being away from the court.
The other thing was like, where does it cross? Like, I remember one of the things that came up in the Matt Heath situation a couple of years ago was, I guess they had, gotten caught stealing or whatever it may be. And so Heath shows up at practice and was like, we are going to slide until, you're bleeding from your ass. And like, he literally made them slide over and over and over and over until literally guys were bleeding like on the side of their ass, is one of the stories that I heard.
But that was as a punishment for some guys who got caught in the program stealing?
No. Like caught stealing in a game, like trying to steal second base. He was trying to show how to slide into second base.
Not a Lonnie Chisenhall situation. Got it.
Not a Lonnie Chisenhall situation, which I was there for you when I was shooting that for you, and Ray Tanner broke down crying about that one. That was one of the more intense little media scrums I've ever been part of. It was I still remember it. It was at Sarge Fry. We ran down there. It was two guys. It was Chisenhall and like a relief pitcher, and
Nick something or other. And you can yell at your device right now. I'll look it up.
Is it Nick Reeves or no?
Nope. Apologies to Nick Reeves. I'll look it up real quick. But yeah, that's old school South Carolina baseball stuff. But you're right. A notable day. If you were there, you'll never forget it. Even if you maybe even saw it on TV.
We'll never forget it because Ray Tanner literally was just standing there crying. I mean, I remember I asked one question and he just looked at the camera, and it was like, I'm sure it was 10 seconds before he started talking, but it felt like an absolute eternity when you're standing there with the microphone and Like, oh my God. So, I mean, yeah, that was 16 years ago that happened. But I mean, obviously Lonnie Chisenhall worked out all right. He had a pretty decent career in the major leagues.
Yeah, and you got to remember, number one recruit in the country involved here, had to kick him off the team, and that was such a strange deal. They were stealing meal money, right? I mean, stealing like from their own team, like it was an odd situation for sure. And yeah, you're right, intense in a lot of ways. So I think the larger part of this discussion is what is required from coaches. Where does challenging cross the line to abuse? And then what you had to say about the Wojcik situation at a different school, it's fine. And that's hard for me to wrap my brain around, right? How can
well, the funny thing is
abuse one place and not at another place?
Well, that's the thing. And the other part about it is that will you ever truly know what was said and what the intent was if it's not recorded? Which obviously these things were not recorded.
Well, I've seen a one report out there. Fitz News, I think, is saying there was there's a watch recording of some kind of rant by Chad Holbrook. Just take that for what it's worth.
If it's a rant, I mean, I don't think that's
even then. I got a big problem with that, man. You're telling me that players now are recording like stuff that is supposed to be within the team. You know what I mean? Like,
sure.
There's that. There's like the loyalty from the player standpoint. But if a team gets to a point where players feel like they have to do that, like then I also on the other side, I'm like, all right, well, maybe there does have to be some accountability there. Weird. Nick Fuller, by the way. Thank you, Roger.
Nick Fuller. There you go. Yeah, I don't know what the line is. I mean, I know that we live in a culture now where, you know, mental health is at the forefront. It is absolutely at the forefront. You know, we have heard of players committing suicide. We've heard of athletes who really are, you know, I mean, mental health has absolutely come to the forefront. And I understand that. I fully understand that for sure. And I'm not a person who's like, well, if your mental health is struggling, you shouldn't play baseball. Like, I don't feel that way at all. I don't feel that way at all. But I think ultimately you've got to, you know, that's why you hire a lawyer, to find out as well as you can what was said. But yes, it's hard to draw a line because no two situations are ever the same. You know, that's the thing. Like, you can't draw a line like, well, if Chad Holbrook curses 25 times in a 5-minute speech, then it's considered verbal abuse. You can't do that. There's no template for this whole thing. And, you know, I guess the situation, if it's recorded, and it's amazing the parallels, because that's the exact same thing that happened with Doug Wojcik, was that he was just blistering. He was just going the fuck off on his director of operations because the guy hired the wrong bus for the team when they were up in Connecticut, I think. And somebody was like, man, he is just dressing him down. And somebody stood outside Doug Wojcik's office door with a recorder and recorded the whole conversation. And Doug Wojcik was, I mean, you're a fucking idiot. And he was dressing the dude down. But should he have been recorded doing that when he wasn't, when it wasn't known that he was being recorded? I think the person who recorded its whole thing was, well, I was in a public hallway and I could hear it through the door in a public hallway, that it's fair game. And then you're getting into the logistics of like, what is fair game to record? And I don't know the answer is as far as that goes. I mean, that's how deep you can get. And it got this deep at the College of Charleston. I mean, that's the thing, is it got that deep just a couple of years ago with that situation.
And players know that too. That's the tricky part about this specifically, right? If you come into a program that has had some issues already, I think the higher likelihood there is, from my perspective, to have a disgruntled player run to an administrator or however this investigation started and the whole thing. Because just having been part of a college baseball program for 1 year, my very little limited personal experience, I can really see like how players specific players who aren't getting what they want and not getting the reaction they want from the coaching staff can skew the truth real quick. I'm hopeful, Scotty, like you said, that an investigation can bring this thing into the proper perspective and get to the truth. But I don't know. I'm not.
Well, the other part of it too is that I think there's a different mentality in baseball from football and basketball. I think there's a feeling of like they own you. They're giving you a full scholarship. They
Right.
own you. Baseball 11.7. They don't own you, or they own a little bit of you, but the rest of it I'm paying to be here. And there's certainly a different dynamic that goes along with I'm paying to be here and help you rather than you are providing me a full education.
Well, as well as just the nature of baseball. Hey, I'm playing for you 56 times a year as opposed to 12. Like there's only so much you can take 56 times versus 12 times. And
the ironic thing is it seems to have it worked. I mean, because the college went on that absolute heater after that. They were, very, very good this year. It fizzled at the tournament, but they were a good team. After that initial, hit, with those 6 or 7 losses, they were good. And so,
that's why I asked you about the Wojcik situation. How much did they win? Because that does factor in. There's no doubt about it. A coach can have a defense like, hey, that's what this team needs. That's what motivates most of these guys, and it worked. As opposed to, hey, if you kept doing that, you kept losing, then you're just a bad coach, and then you're crossing the line. I think it's a lot easier to see them crossing the line that way.
Well, the ironic thing of all of it, I'm still pretty close with Doug Wojcik, and we talk pretty often. We had to bury the hatchet. It was funny. The whole situation was kind of a wacky, funny thing now that I look back on it. But I had gotten a tip that Doug Wojcik was, he was supposed to be on suspension. He was supposed to be suspended, from all activities. And somebody texted me, he's down in Augusta recruiting at the Peach Jam. And I said, oh my God, so like, I just jumped in my car and drove down there. I'm like, I'm going to drive to Augusta and get this guy. I'm going to catch him red-handed, that is breaking a rule. And so I go down there and I'm just chasing my own tail around for 2 days around Aiken and Augusta because there's like 8 different gyms and I can't find him. I cannot find Doug Wojcik. Like I could not get him. I kept missing him everywhere I went, and I I will take full blame. I shouldn't have done it, but I called him and got his voicemail and I said, Doug, this is Scott. We can do this the easy way or the hard way. The easy way is you come out and talk to me. The hard way, I will hunt you down. And then by like 4:00 the next day, I still had not had a sniff of Doug Wojcik. He was throwing out trackers that was like, he had another coach call me and tell me, Doug's down in Atlanta already. He was trying to get me to drive to Atlanta to look for him. He was never in Atlanta. He was in Augusta. He just was, but he had his buddies. And then finally I was leaving and I got to, near Columbia and my phone rings and it's Doug Wojcik and I answer and all I hear was, Scott, you're fucking with a former naval intelligence officer. And then he hung up and that was it. And so, it took about 2 years, but we ended up burying the hatchet. I covered both of his kids in high school at Porter Dowd and they were both just the best kids you'd ever want. I mean, he's got one kid that goes to Brown, plays basketball, and one kid that goes to Harvard and plays basketball. And, obviously did a pretty good job raising his own kids. And, we buried the hatchet and we laugh about it now. And he's still sour about the whole thing at the college. He still does not believe he did anything wrong. I mean, he absolutely does not believe he did wrong. And it didn't end his career. I mean, he's now a top assistant for Tom Izzo at Michigan State. He's done very well since then. But it took him time to get to that point. But he's, it still will always be a he said, she said. I think that recording had a lot to do with the whole situation. Should that have been recorded or not? I don't know to this day the answer because part of me says, yeah, you are in a public hallway. If your phone picks that up in a public hallway, you can do that. The other part is he's in a private meeting with his door closed. That should not be recorded.
But what
I don't know.
There still is an obligation as a coach, I think. Like if you have a massive problem with your stuff being recorded, to me, you're just trying to hide things, right? And that's not a situation that you want as well. I do think
in that situation, he was out of line. You don't dress down an employee like that. I mean, that
Well,
guy is an employee.
to me, dressing down someone is also doing it in front of others, or I don't know. There are just ways to do it, right? And clearly, I think he had gotten to the point where it was just too much, but he's still not willing to admit that, huh?
Yeah, no, yeah. He is. There is certainly a vendetta there against the old administration at the college, and does not believe they handled it correctly. But then again, I mean, there was a settlement reached, and I don't know what the end result of that whole thing taught anybody. I don't know what that taught anybody, but I think it did teach the college that we're going to get out ahead. But they were ahead of that one. I mean, they took the complaint seriously, and they had a lawyer. I mean, it was a 50-page document that lawyer had come up with all of the situation. Now, I don't think it's going to go that deep with this baseball thing, just because I don't think there's that much of a body of work, if you will, of things that were controversial. I think it stems back to a meeting. How serious did it get? I don't know how serious it got. I don't know how off the chains it got. I have no idea. But I mean, I don't know. Chad Holbrook just doesn't seem like that personality to me that would just fly off the rocker like that and just get completely unhinged. So that's what kind of surprises me.
I'm with you on that, but I am surprised by all the drama surrounding this College of Charleston program, since 2014 that
it's nonstop.
That has happened for sure. But just that.
Well, and it also brings into question, is this investigation simply being done because Matt Roberts and Chad Holbrook are like best friends? They were in each other's weddings. They went to North Carolina. They were at North Carolina together as, Roberts was a walk-on and Holbrook was, I think, an assistant. And I mean, they're very, very close. So, I mean, if it's your closest friend, can you truly do an investigation on them, or do you just have to go to an outside source to have it done to be on the up and up?
Well, it makes sense to go outside at that point when you have the personal connection there. That was always the more complicated part about Holbrook taking over for Ray Tanner, right? That their prior relationship was what it was. And then Tanner said he was going to, be hands off and let Chad be the head coach and the whole thing. But then, man, when things start going south, how much do you step in and try to help out, or how much do you have to step back? And then, as far as I know, Scotty, they still haven't really talked since it went down. Do you know any different?
I don't know any different. No, I don't know. I've talked to Holbrook a ton, but I have not talked to him about Ray Tanner ever. So I don't know. I wouldn't be shocked. I mean, I wouldn't be shocked if that was the case.
When I first heard that was really surprising to me, knowing their relationship. Yeah.
You got fired. I wouldn't. I mean, I haven't thought. I've never. I mean, I've been fired from one job. I was a kid working at a camp, and a kid jumped in the pool, and there was no lifeguards there, and I got fired. But so that relationship, I guess, with the camp soured. But I don't know. I mean, if somebody fired me, I wouldn't want to talk to them.
Okay. Having been fired, I can tell you that I don't have ill will towards a bunch of people at my previous company, especially knowing the deal. But I would think when you get to a certain level,
have the ill will. I'm assuming you have ill will towards the guy whose ultimate decision it was to fire you.
Never met the man, so it's a little different situation. A little different situation on my end. But if there had been a prior relationship, and the standard of winning at a place, and you don't meet that standard, to me, that's something that you have to live with and get over personally, right? Like missing the NCAA tournament 2 times in 4 or 5 years is what Chad Holbrook did. Like that those are just facts. And you have
Mark Kingston just did that, right?
Absolutely. But coming off the heels of the Chad Holbrook era, not off the heels of the Ray Tanner era. And also I think, doesn't there have to be some empathy for the person that you put in that situation that had to make that decision? I would think you'd have to kind of I mean, if you and Doug Wojcik can be buddies after you trying to chase him down in that whole situation, I would like to think that you could kind of come around and get past a bad patch, and that's a bad patch for sure. But I mean, Chad Holbrook landed on his feet, and it seems to have worked out relatively well for him, almost better for him than the South Carolina baseball program at this point.
I don't know if I'd say that, because he's making about $500,000 less than he was making in South Carolina. I mean, he's making a whole lot less money. So he's in a good situation, but his facilities are not what they were at South Carolina, and his travel arrangements are not what they were.
Sure.
South Carolina, you jump on a private jet and you're in Arkansas in 2 hours. If you remember this season, Chad Holbrook, you remember they were stuck up in New York and after playing Hofstra, and he's on Twitter begging to find a bus that's going to drive him back from Hofstra, because their Southwest flight, or no, it was American, got canceled. And look, he has a nice life. He makes 200 whatever grand, and he lives in Charleston. But I would certainly say his lifestyle took a hit from being out at South Carolina to being here. I mean, there's no doubt about that.
Totally agree. I don't think they do private jets, by the way. I don't think they do charter flights for the baseball teams.
They fly commercial?
Yeah, I'm pretty positive they do, and very rarely these days. The Texas A&M, the Arkansas, I think those are about the only times. Maybe LSU for baseball programs.
Really?
Maybe
I would have thought they fly charter. It just makes more sense when you're flying that many people with a baseball. It's shocking to me that they're flying commercially to get to these places.
Maybe we'll get the latest on that. Not sure. I mean, with the SEC expansion being what it is,
yeah.
Those accommodations have gotten a little bit better. What about that? Have we even talked since I don't think we talked since the Pac-12 thing hit. Have we? Southern Cal and UCLA, where are you at on that mess, man?
Well, I mean, it's just I get it. I certainly get it. Money speaks, and it's going to be financially a lot better for them. And the whole landscape is changing. There's no doubt about that. The landscape is changing. I understand it. I mean, I just don't think we should call them conferences anymore. It's not. I mean, conference to me signifies it as something geographic or regional or whatever it may be. If you're gonna have conferences that span from Los Angeles to Piscataway, New Jersey, then it's not a conference. It's just an alliance of teams to me.
What about the ones that you cover? How far is the Colonial geographically? It's pretty spread out, isn't it?
Charleston to Boston.
Right. So, I mean, if they can be that.
Colonial is Charleston to Boston, but Colonial is now adding, they're adding like 4 more. They're getting NCA&T, they're getting Hampton, they're getting Stony Brook, and they're getting one more that's escaping me right now. They're adding like crazy. The Big South is now expanding to, Big South goes from like North Alabama to, Bryant up in Providence, Rhode Island. That's the conference we cover. The only one that stayed regional is the SoCon. The SoCon is still the SoCon. The SoCon is the SoCon, and I don't think you'll see them change from being the Southern Conference, but I don't know. But yeah, the Big South has had a pivot 100% because the Big South with Charleston Southern has, they needed to have enough teams just to get an automatic berth into the NC or the whatever, 1AA, the FCS tournament, the playoff. So they had to add Bryant in Rhode Island. They had to add Robert Morris in Pittsburgh. They've added Monmouth. All of these schools they've had to add, which don't fit into the Big South footprint. And then the CAA, they go Northeastern, Stony Brook, Hofstra, all the way down to Wilmington and Charleston and Elon on the southern part of it.
Yeah, so I'm glad you brought up those conferences because no one we very rarely talk about them. They don't get any national publicity or criticism, but they are doing the exact same thing, if not more, than the big boys there. Where does it lead is the question. The 2 super conferences is kind of the.
I think so.
You do? I'm not convinced.
I think the 2 super conferences are ultimately how it's going to have to happen. I really think so, because when you start making alliances of like other conferences that already exist that just don't make sense, it just doesn't like to align the ACC with the Pac-12 as an alliance and have a championship game in Vegas. It'll never work. Who cares if Wake Forest plays Washington State in Las Vegas? There'll be 4,000 people there, and like half of them will be parents. Nobody will care. I just that's not gonna push the needle at all. I mean, I think you've got to have the needle pushed by the matchups that people want to see. But although, I mean, I just feel like there is something to be said about regional rivalries. I mean, regional rivalries are what make college sports great. I don't want to see those taken away, but I just think ultimately money speaks, and that TV money, when you're going to be in one of those power conferences, is going to be too high. The revenue is going to be too high for an athletics director to say, we're not going to go for that.
So what happens next, man? All the social media buzz I've been seeing in the last few days is about Clemson and possibly SEC.
I get it. I don't think it's going to happen right away. But I mean, if you're Clemson, you see your conference crumbling. You got to go. I mean, you've got to do it. I don't know how it's going to happen, but you've got to make a push at the SEC. I mean, Clemson, Florida State are absolutely brands that the SEC it would work. Now, the other two that I think they were mentioning, Virginia and Va-Tech. Maybe Va-Tech works, but Virginia, that's not. They'd be more on the Vanderbilt end of things than they would on the Alabama end of things for sure. So I don't know. I mean, but I think if you're Clemson, you have to be exploring these options.
I agree with that. But then what about on the other side? What's the SEC perspective on this? Why would the SEC bite? To me, they are obviously in a power position right now.
Yeah. Well,
so why?
If you're, I mean, again, will ESPN have any say in this whole thing? Are they going to merge the ACC and SEC network sort of thing? Like, I don't know what they're going to end up doing, but I'm sure I'm not smart enough to know where all that money is funneling into where, but I think at some point money has to play into this as well.
You're right. So to me, that's one of the keys, right? Fox, a big driver behind this Big Ten expansion. ESPN, obviously, the big driver behind the SEC expansion. What do those networks ultimately want? I think will probably weigh a lot more than what these schools want in a lot of ways, and what's good for the fan. The TV networks don't care. They care about making the most money and getting the best matchups in a lot of ways. So that's why I don't think it's necessarily going to go to these two super conferences, because I don't see them having just Team ESPN and Team Fox. That's a lot of dominoes that got to fall, man.
I think also part of a lot of what Clemson's going to have to deal with is going to revolve around Notre Dame. And do they end up staying in the ACC? And like, what does Notre Dame end up doing? Because they're such a big brand that they could drive a conference, and, you know, a network is really going to be interested in Notre Dame.
Well, yeah, but they already have it. NBC. They're good. Why would, and especially now, why would they give in? Wow. What do they have to gain unless it seems like Greg Sankey's been on board with them, and the Big Ten's been on board with them, letting them in the college football playoff or have the opportunity to be there. If that's happened up until now, why would that change? And then what's in it for Notre Dame to go to a conference?
Well, I don't know what's going to be in it for Notre Dame at that point. Yeah, I mean, I liked it the year that Notre Dame had to play for an ACC title. I like that, you know, that whole situation.
Oh, I'm with you. I hate the fact that they're just out there and they can do that. They can play by their own rules. I don't like it, but it's reality, and I don't see it changing, unfortunately. If they get this far.
I don't know what the right answer is. I don't know. I mean, I don't know if, you know, how the two super conference thing would work. I have no idea what happens to the rest of those Power 5 schools that become not Power 5 schools anymore. There wouldn't be Power 5s because there wouldn't be 5 conferences. But you know, does this all lead to basically the NCAA being absolved? I mean, does it end up happening, and then basically the colleges are running the show? I don't know what this all, where this all goes. I don't know where this all goes. Would I like to see? I still think the ACC is a supremely viable basketball conference, which is not talked about as much. But I mean, I think that right now, when I look at it, I don't want to see the ACC with UNC and Duke and those teams go away. I mean, that's a great conference. It's a great conference. I know it doesn't have the weight in football, but I still think it's a great conference in basketball. I don't want to see the ACC go away, but I just don't know what the revenue difference is between ACC basketball and ACC football.
I'm with you. Yeah, and football is obviously the driver here, but basketball is. It's got to be a consideration with $1 billion that's attached to the NCAA tournament. Yeah, it's a mess, man. I mean, as you were talking about it, maybe we can get to a place where football conferences are one thing and basketball conferences are another. The Olympic sports, the non-revenue generating sports. I don't know how long you can send your swimming team from LA to Chicago and back and forth in the whole thing when you're Southern Cal and UCLA, but maybe there's enough millions of dollars there.
I guess if they're flying, I mean, they're already flying from Los Angeles to Pullman, Washington. Is it that different to fly from Los Angeles to New York or Chicago? I don't know.
Good point, man. Looks like you might be on the second run of the camp deal. You need to hop out.
I do, yeah. I got to run for part 2, but it was good catching up.
You too, man. Scotty, appreciate it. Oh, and check out Scotty's recent work, man. Great story yesterday. Great story about Jeff Hart and the WYFF legend doing great stuff on TV, man. WCIV, well done.
Thanks, man. Appreciate it. See ya.
Scott Eisberg, ladies and gentlemen, the ABC sports director at WCIV-TV down in Charleston, and always full of information / opinions and stories that Doug Wojcik won, chasing him down in Augusta back in the day. I love the fact that came back around, and they're not just on speaking terms, but almost buddies now. It's crazy to me. And yeah, that Tanner Holbrook situation, the College of Charleston deal right now, to me, it's so slippery, right? You want to be fair to everyone involved. And from the outside looking in, I just don't know how you can do that in a lot of ways, except for letting the investigation play out. But then it's, all right, how much of the truth do you actually get? You're never going to get all of it. You're going to get one side of it, another side of it. There's 3 sides of the truth. He said and she said, and then what actually happened. The verbal abuse is such a subjective thing, right? What is verbal abuse to one person, I think, isn't to another. Maybe it's one of those things that can be defined by, you know it when you hear it. Well, I feel like I've heard it in a lot of ways, and yet it's just commonplace for certain exchanges. You telling me Nick Saban's never been guilty of verbal abuse? Have you seen that guy on the sideline? See him making an NFL player cry back in his Dolphins days? Have you seen Tom Izzo get after guys? It's happened relatively recently, right? I think it was last season or the basketball season before, where people were having a problem with Tom Izzo, and it basically came down to a hard coaching discussion, right? And Izzo has so many wins and so much success built up, so much cachet, that he was able to get right through it, and it wasn't that big of a career hurdle kind of thing. And that's also part of this discussion, right? I mean, part of the equation, you feel like. I mean, Bobby Knight's the obvious example. Mike Krzyzewski in a different sort of level. Like, I know people have been shocked by the language they've heard out of the all-time winningest college basketball coach when they've actually gone to games and been able to sit close enough to hear him. Usually it's aimed at an official, right? But you know, behind closed doors, it gets to his team and the whole thing. So it comes down to, I think, the overall relationship, because maybe that's the next step, right? Does it go from an instance or two of saying some things to becoming an abusive type relationship where that is just the norm? And I guess that's what the investigation has to figure out, because watching the Frank Martin tenure at South Carolina up close and personal, man, That was my reaction a lot of times when kids were coming off the court and Frank just got after him, right? That's who he was. Especially, I mean, during timeouts, you guys all saw it, right? Just stomping right up to a guy's face and letting him have it. And I remember after the suspension, Scotty brought up, right? He was suspended for a game because of some choice words that were said. And I think it was one of those quiet Colonial Life Arena crowds. And the TV mics picked up pretty much what he was saying. So asked him, that was towards the end of the season. At the postseason wrap-up, I asked him if that suspension was going to cause him to reevaluate or lead to any changes in his coaching style or philosophy. And he said, I'll give you the tapes from my JV high school coaching days. Like, that's just who I've always been. That's who I am, kind of thing. No, I'm not changing it. The question did make him happy. And I knew it wouldn't, but I thought it was a valid one that had to be asked. Now, on the other side, I am certainly not, especially with raising kids myself, I'm certainly not of the, hey, you just have to let kids be kids and it's the 2022 and you just can't say certain things to them because it's going to hurt their feelings. And you guys know I'm not with that. I mean, the fact that we've gotten to the point in the country or the point in society where people put their pronouns up on social media and the whole thing is baffling to me. Like, to me, that's a product of poor formation from adults and not being strong enough, firm enough. And I think we gotten way off track as a society in that way. And I think coaches might be the best examples of holding young adults, specifically if we're talking about college sports, accountable and being that kind of guiding light and all this other mess that, like, no, you have to be accountable. You have to be challenged and understand ultimately that being challenged is a good thing. And they do it out of a place of, and that's what this ultimately comes down to, right? Are you doing it out of the right place? Are you coming at it as a coach from the correct place of not just trying to win to save your job, but respecting your player and caring about their development too? And having an outside law firm from Columbia go down to Charleston and try to evaluate that, it seems like a near impossible task in a lot of ways. So I don't know where this thing's going to lead, but an interesting wrinkle out of the College of Charleston for sure, and especially for Gamecock fans that lived the Chad Holbrook era. I don't know how Gamecock fans right now evaluate that era maybe a little bit differently, having seen Chad Holbrook have some success at the College of Charleston, but also knowing he hasn't gotten them to the NCAA tournament. Charleston came to Columbia last year and beat up on Clemson. Monty Lee's out of that Clemson job. Tough jobs, man. You got to win a lot of games. And now, especially, you have to do it in a certain way to avoid offending kids who hear things in 2022, I think, differently than certainly my generation, the generation before mine. Wow, what a mess. What a mess down there. Well, just something to keep an eye on for sure. Really appreciate you guys tuning into the live stream this morning. 8 to 10 is where we kind of move things up. Scott mentioned that a little bit earlier. Mentioned off the top of the show, the Gamecock baseball news was adding a 9th transfer from the transfer portal. That news popping out on social media yesterday. It was Southern Miss second baseman Will McGillis. I think he was originally from California. I looked up his social media bio and it said San Diego. And now, I believe it did anyway, he hit 16 home runs for Sweet 16, hosting Southern Miss, I think they're the Golden Eagles there, and that's where Ole Miss ended up playing in that super regional. And our buddy Stuart Lake told us all about his bad experiences at Southern Miss and the whole thing. I actually got to be on a team that played there way back in the day, and didn't notice anything across the line, but that was again, brief personal experience at Southern Miss. Really good baseball program for a long time. I think this is more like what Gamecock fans expected on a normal basis, or if your head coach and Mark Kingston, who came out, I think it was about this time last week when he had his basically year wrap up press conference saying that, yeah, transfer portal, we're doing good things, feeling good about it. Well, I can see that from a team that ended up hosting a super regional, a guy who had 16 home runs off that team. That makes sense to me on paper a lot more than what we saw with some other transfer guys coming in and their numbers and the programs they were coming from. So I feel like McGillis is going to be a guy who is counted on pretty heavily. Now, the 265 batting average you might be harping on, I think the more important one is the on-base percentage, and I think that was up towards 400, pretty good. So this is a guy, I think, that might have been who Mark Kingston was referring to more than some of the other guys, especially maybe some of the Clemson transfers that we focus more of our attention on, obviously, in the state of South Carolina. Well, Teddy D, interesting, because he's got, I know, he's raising a son as well, who's a heck of a golfer, by the way. I feel like our society is training people/kids to be offended rather than teaching our kids to toughen up. I appreciate you bringing up these topics. Absolutely, Teddy. And I bring them up maybe more out of selfishness than anything else, because I'm trying to figure it out too. But, and that's why I say I appreciate these coaches. I think, I don't know, I have not heard of, let me be very clear, of a situation. I know there was a K-State player that came out, was very highly critical of his Frank Martin experience, but I've never heard of a parent of a player who went through a college career or any kind of playing situation for Frank Martin who came out and was highly critical of it. And to me, I take that perspective, I put that at kind of a higher rung than the actual player. An adult who has had more experience and is seeing it from the adult's perspective for their child, who's not a child in the college experience, I get that, but who is in very formative years, I think that says a lot. And I think you've only heard the opposite of parents being really appreciative of seeing their son go through those formative years and having a guy like Frank Martin lead it. And so that's where I think we as people from the outside have to see that, understand it, respect it, and kind of pull back any kind of knee-jerk reaction of stuff that we see in those instances, in those hot spotlight moments for sure, but we don't know the whole story, man. Good morning to you too, Hope. Happy Friday as well on July 8th, sitting right in the middle of summer. Hope you have a chance, if you haven't already, to get away a little bit, maybe catch a few days towards some water. That's what I'm going to be doing this upcoming week. So no shows coming up next week. Would love for you guys. And what DC started us off this morning, I think one of the first comments today was that he didn't get a chance to see most of yesterday's show. Well, that's the beauty of doing this show, how we do it. Automatically archives all over the place on Twitter and YouTube. You can go back and watch the video replays, Facebook, the same thing. You can also catch the podcast version, the audio-only versions all over the podcast platforms. So feel free to do that if you're just itching to hear my annoying voice next week. But a great time to do it, in that it's typically a downtime from the college football perspective. I didn't plan on seeing this pop out today. I don't know why the Big 12 has done this. I think it's their preseason media poll that popped up. Did you guys see this? I really want to get into it in just a second as we're about to kick off hour number 2. Baylor is picked to win the Big 12 in football. A sentence that my brain almost stopped me from saying out loud, that I never thought I'd be saying. And yet here we are, as we talk about all this stuff and being where we are, and July 8th, 2022. This one, from a sports perspective, leads the way for me. Get into much more of that as we get into hour number 2. First, wanted to let you hear a little bit from South Carolina Associate AD Hillary Cox. If you missed her yesterday, or even if you heard her, I think this is worth another watch or listen. Just sums up exactly how much name, image, and likeness has really shifted things, especially from someone who works inside an athletics department. Her background was in compliance before, and now she's in charge of all things name, image, and likeness at the University of South Carolina. Plenty more to come in hour number 2. Looking forward to it. Glad you're a part of the program. Here's Hillary Cox from yesterday's program.
So this is how the times have changed. We used to do, we do a lot of compliance education, and we would tell our student athletes, give them an example, if you walked into the local burrito store and they said, oh, you're on the football team, here's a free burrito, you can't accept that, right? But if you walk into the burrito store and they say you're a student at the University of South Carolina, you get 15% off. Okay, that's fine. That's not an extra benefit as long as it's available to everyone. So now imagine in our professional world shifting our thought to now, instead of telling me they can't take the free burrito, to saying, why don't you walk into your favorite burrito store and ask them for a free burrito and see what they say, and then post about it on social media.
There, it's so mind-boggling in so many ways, and we'll get back into that in just a little bit. First, need to tell you, and am pleased to tell you about a sponsor of the program, Freedom Primary Care. Freedom Primary Care is who I trust to guide the health of my family right now, and you can check them out. Give them a call at 803-627-2447. They're based up near where I live now in Fort Mill, but if you don't live in the area, you can still take advantage of their services via telemedicine. And the main reason that I am trusting Freedom Primary Care I'm trusting them with my family, or my family's care with them, is because they know that the responsibility of your health is mainly yours. They're there certainly as a big time resource and as a guide, but they are responsible to you, not for you. And that's a big difference. I've gone through it myself in a very major way here. And to have the freedom to make your own healthcare decisions, I never knew that I would have to talk about that publicly or argue that that's a fundamental right in our country, but that's where we are. Right. And Freedom Primary Care, just by the name, you can tell they're all for that. And they want you to understand that they're going to put out the options for you, but ultimately it's going to be your decision, right? If you want to go the more naturally minded way, they're going to give you a complete plan of care there. If you want to go more the traditional route from a medical standpoint, they'll have that for you as well. All kinds of benefits from Freedom Primary Care. Again, the phone number. Give them a call. Check them out. Tell them you heard about them from Tim Hill, unrestricted free agent. The phone number for Freedom Primary Care is 803-627-2447. We appreciate them supporting the program. Any support you can give them as well, greatly appreciated here on the show as we roll into hour number 2. York starts us off with a happy Friday, everybody. And is it just me, or does July in general just feel a lot better in South Carolina when there is a football season that you can look forward to? Legitimately look forward to, based off of some success in the last football season. Some success. I think that's all Gamecock fans really look for, really require, let's say. Anything other, maybe this is just coming off the end of the Will Muschamp era, and anything other than seeing uncompetitive performance after uncompetitive performance and a defensive-minded coach who didn't seem to have a defense that would be worth a dang, at least 1 out of every 2 games. And never having offensive success. Well, now you're coming off of a bowl game where your first-year head coach just beat a national championship head coach and staff and beat them pretty good in a game they were pretty solid underdog in. And you got most of, if not all, your weapons coming back, your big time players. And then you added some more in a big way, especially with Spencer Rattler coming in, the Oklahoma transfer quarterback. And Jaheim Bell, how he went nuts against North Carolina, seems poised to have a breakout year and the whole thing. York says for sure, Tim, I am eager for all, but this one is up there on the anticipation scale. I want to see the offensive line improve. I'm guessing is where York was going with that. Yeah, you always do it. I feel like that's always part of the conversation in July for Gamecock fans, but just football fans in general, man. And maybe it's just a different scale on South Carolina fans, but that has been the most, I think, frustrating part in the last several years. Not only being a South Carolina alum, but doing this job and talking about Gamecock football nearly every single day is just that there haven't been those promising points you can point towards, those promising situations that you can point towards a specific recruit or a specific position group. There have been many more groups or holes to point towards and say, yeah, how you going to make up for that, man? Teddy D, pumped for Gamecock football. My daughter will be a freshman at Carolina. Wife is a graduate student, so this will be a special season. Let's go Gamecocks. And he's got the avatar there, the aerial view of Williams-Brice. Yeah, I think that's fair, man. And in 2022, where college football is, there's a lot of changing and shifting going on in the major landscape, especially with that Big Ten news, and who knows what's going to happen with the Pac-12-ish, Pac-10-ish right now. But I have seen the sentiments out there, the articles out there that it's only going to get more difficult for South Carolina and the whole thing. But I don't even know what that means. What's more difficult? Because I look at it from the perspective of the 90s when South Carolina joined the SEC, with Steve Spurrier having Florida where they were, with Tennessee being what it was, the Orange Crush at the end of the schedule. It's not getting more difficult than that. I get it. Because where Georgia and Clemson have been in the last few years. It can't get more difficult than that. Georgia and Clemson have been winning national championships. Georgia over here, Clemson right there, you're in the middle. It does not get more difficult than that. You know, the strength of the conference overall, yeah, I think it's more difficult. I think it gets more difficult for everyone else in the conference. They almost rise, they're starting to rise up, or the playing field might be leveling off, might be the better way to put that, for other programs to make it that much more difficult for them to what it's typically been for South Carolina. And also the security from the Gamecock perspective right now compared to the absolute insecurity of where Clemson sits in this conference landscape, I think is reassuring for Gamecock fans. I think you got to start there as opposed to, hey, now you're going to have to play Oklahoma and Texas, and that's going to be one more tough game on the schedule. Well, what's one more? I mean, right now, South Carolina sits with a permanent cross-division opponent that was just the number one recruiting class in the country, and Jimbo Fisher and A&M don't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So I think it's a bit of a ridiculous argument to say things get more. It gets tougher for South Carolina. It gets even more difficult to see the top of the mountain or the whole thing, and especially maybe it's with the optimism, enthusiasm, energy that Shane Beamer has brought to the program as well. Maybe it's his rhetoric of not taking a backseat to anybody and not just saying that South Carolina is a special place, but it feeling like he means it and can convey that. Maybe that's why I am where I am. And also maybe the fact that this thing is a thing. How about this headline? It's nuts to me. Growing up in the 80s, Baylor picked to win the Big 12. And this is not some dumb preseason poll where you can't put any stock into it. They won the Big 12 last year off of a 2-win season the year before. In Dave Aranda's first year, year number 2, massive transformation and success. Also, Oklahoma and Texas are transitioning out of the conference, but they're still in the Big 12 this year. Oklahoma could have very well been picked for the 8th straight year to win this thing, but they weren't. And they got one guy on the preseason all-conference team instead of 9 guys last year. That one guy's a punter. You got a first-year head coach in Brent Venables. If ever there was a time to not pick Oklahoma to win the Big 12, this is the year, and that's what has happened. So I probably should not be as surprised as I was to see this headline. But coming at it from seeing Baylor as the absolute laughingstock in Power 5 football for so long, equating them to Vanderbilt. Vanderbilt of Texas is how I see Baylor. And if you're a Vandy fan and you're taking offense to that, first of all, there are not many Vandy fans out there, so I guess I don't have to worry about that. But, Baylor has obviously, this is not the first time they're a good football team. Not the first time they've been relevant in major college football, but to go in as preseason favorites, it is the first time that's happened. Dave Aranda deserves all the credit. And he might be, he's the most interesting man in major college football in the exact opposite way that I usually look at that. Like Lane Kiffin, brash and outspoken and does dumb stuff on social media. Mike Leach with his rants about aliens and Bigfoot and mascots, and having written a book about Native Americans, I think, Native American history. Like, those are really interesting dudes in college football, and we talked a ton about those guys, and everybody talks about them. Dave Aranda is like the opposite kind of guy. Like, he seems like he would rather not talk in front of a microphone, and that is so unusual for a major college football coach, for a football coach at any level, really. But Dave Aranda, he seems, I feel bad for him. He seems massively uncomfortable. I watched that Big 12 title game against Oklahoma State, and afterwards, it's like, it's almost, I'm cringing as I'm watching it because it seems so uncomfortable for him, or it's not something that he seems to like and embrace like most coaches, and he's such a cerebral kind of guy, and reading stories about him just been fascinating. So he deserves a ton of credit here. What Baylor football has become has been kind of equal parts tragic in a lot of ways and fascinating with the awful stuff that has happened through the years and how it's been handled and the whole thing. And now to see different coaches cycle through, and the brief Matt Rule era, and then handing it off to Dave Aranda, and it not working out year 1, and then completely flipped it in year 2. So if Baylor can do it, I guess my point is, how can you not have some faith or optimism that your college football program can do it? I think you have to. Whether you're South Carolina, Northwestern, who is seemingly playing for a Big Ten title every other year and finishing last they just alternate. And it's kind of what Baylor did, right, in the last 2 years under Dave Aranda. I don't know if he's going to have that kind of it seems nearly impossible to have that kind of roller coaster going year in and year out. Maybe that's the type of program he's going to have. I don't know. But he seems to be so smart, especially on the defensive side of the ball. I would be shocked if that happens, but that's kind of Pat Fitzgerald's MO as well up at Northwestern. Baylor picked to win the Big 12. The equivalent, I think, of Vanderbilt picked to win the SEC. James Franklin got him pretty close, but never really seriously. And we all understand the big boys at the top of the SEC aren't the big boys at the top of the Big 12. I get it, Oklahoma. Yep, you're going to get your chance, right? Texas, you'll get your chance, but Texas certainly hasn't proven any kind of consistency from a championship standpoint. Oklahoma had. And then last year happened. And now the preseason predictions kind of follow that. And Brent Venables has a big task in front of him, a big opportunity as well. But wanted to spend a little bit of time this morning pointing that out for sure, because I think this is another example of how national writers can overhype. The national look at college football can completely overhype what you end up seeing in the college football playoff. What we have seen now in the last, in basically all of the college football playoff, that you get the handful of teams recycled year in and year out, and it's always written, oh, what a bad thing this is for college football, and this system needs to change, and the whole thing. Like, I'm in favor of expanding it, no doubt. But let's understand that college football is not just those teams at the top year after year competing for national championships. It also includes, what we've seen recently, Louisiana, what Billy Napier was able to do, be nationally relevant. Coastal Carolina being nationally relevant. Cincinnati got into the college football playoff. Cincinnati got into the college football playoff, man, is a sentence that never thought I would say either. And now Baylor picked to win the Big 12, another one, coming off a Big 12 championship. So I am encouraged, and it's going to take a lot. It's going to take a lot more than Southern Cal and UCLA jump into the Big Ten. Certainly more than Texas and Oklahoma jump into the SEC. It's going to take, I don't know what it would take for me to not be optimistic about college football moving forward. Because, again, I think we do this with all kinds of things. We do this with our country. I know that instead of comparing our country to other countries, we have some kind of utopian idea that it should be 100% running smoothly. And if it's not, we have to complain and whine, and we have it so difficult and the whole thing. No, that's just not how to me, that's not how I'm going to look at it. I don't think it's the appropriate way to look at it, man. And we should never hold college football to some kind of perfect expectation where we should have had name, image, and likeness completely figured out immediately and should have worked exactly equal for everybody. Like, that's just not how it works. And I was most encouraged talking to Hillary Cox yesterday. We just played that clip not too long ago, who's in charge of name, image, and likeness from the athletics department standpoint over at South Carolina, say what I think a lot of us has said, and hoping, being optimistic that in whatever period of time, in some reasonable period of time within the next year or 2 or 3, that the market will end up evening itself out or stabilizing with this name, image, and likeness thing. And whoever's pumped in 8-figure dollar deals will either see that as a really good investment, and maybe the major players that'll stabilize on that at that standpoint, or more likely will probably see that as unrealized return on investment, ROI, and not be offering ridiculous sums of money for kids to go play at their college football programs all over the place. I have confidence that the market will end up stabilizing. I have confidence that our country will end up figuring out a bunch of major problems. I'm very encouraged with some recent developments. And again, trying to look over a border, especially, I always look at Canada immediately and saying, well, I don't want to live there. They're going through a lot more mess than we are. I mentioned the pronoun issue earlier. You think it's something in America, go live in Canada, right? I visited Mexico. I know how much they appreciate coming to our country. Now, there's some other smaller countries that certainly have great examples of systems being better than ours and the whole thing, but they got a much different dynamic. And if you do if I've ever spent any kind of time going deeper, like, oh, they got their problems too. So we all got problems, man. College football certainly has problems. But the fact that Baylor's picked to win the Big 12 this year, I think, a great shining example of what a program can do. Again, imperfectly, massively imperfect. Maybe the best example of saying that if you want to attack a program, there's plenty to attack at Baylor. Like, plenty of mistakes were made, bad things happened, the whole thing. They gotten through it. They seem to be in a really good spot right now. Again, imperfectly for sure. And that's what college football is so much to me, and it's why I enjoy it more than the NFL, is because it is so imperfect and messy in a lot of ways. It does lead to so much stuff that you would never think would happen, and maybe that's just kind of inherent from having 18 to 24-year-olds playing instead of older, more developed players, maybe able to be more consistent. But I think it's also just you get so many different teams and personalities involved. It can be so unique. You don't have to do it like the other 31 teams in the league or be fired immediately when you have 130 teams. Baylor picked to win the Big 12. Man, never thought I'd see that. Never thought I'd see Wake Forest have as much consistent success in the ACC as we're seeing now. And I guess we have seen to some degree. But with Oklahoma and Texas in that conference, it means a little bit more. I know Clemson's way up there these days. Miami used to be that program. They're not anymore. And that leads to part of the conversation I was having with Scott Eisberg earlier about what's going to happen now. I think, first of all, the fact on social media yesterday that people were putting legitimacy on, I think it was like some sort of media outlet that covers swimming. Typically, that's their go-to, and they was saying a set of schools from the ACC was negotiating with the SEC, including Virginia. I think Scott brought them all up. I think Clemson was part of that, Florida State, Virginia Tech, maybe. And then Barrett Sallee, it was, who I follow from the CBS Sports, and I mentioned his CBSSports.com articles about ranking coaches and strength of schedule and the whole thing. I think he responded yesterday with, nope, that absolutely is not happening. Well, if it is happening, we're not going to know about it through that, I don't think. Because let history be the judge there. Did we know Texas and Oklahoma had reached out to the SEC with any kind of heads up on that? Was it Houston Chronicle that broke that news? And it was 48 hours later, I think, that it was confirmed, done deal, SEC accepting Texas and Oklahoma. And this latest Big 12 thing, Big 10 thing, with Pac-12 losing their prettiest girl at the prom there, with Southern Cal and UCLA heading that way. That wasn't leaked out. That kind of stuff not going to leak out. If it hadn't leaked out before, I don't see it leaking out now. There's too much for all involved to lose. And we've already seen the examples of it happening, no problem. Silky smooth from the leak standpoint, that word is not getting out. So I am fascinated to see what happens, especially with Clemson. I think I've never seen national championship runs aside, haven't seen Clemson get this much run nationally as far as speculation about their future. And Clemson fans, I think, will admit, and I've seen some of them doing just that on social media these days, never really thought they would leave the ACC until now. Because I wanted to correct Scott earlier when he said the Power Five. We don't have it anymore, man. It's not that. It's the SEC and the Big Ten, and then 3 other conferences, and then the Group of 5. And I don't know how long that it doesn't seem like that's a dynamic that can continue for any kind of foreseeable future. That I think it was Gene Sapikoff from the Charleston Post and Courier put out an article about the 3-5-5 new schedule change that's going to come to the ACC, not this season, but it's scheduled to come next. The likelihood of that happening, the way that we perceive that has changed so dramatically. I was on here giving the ACC credit. Good for that conference for finally kind of leading the way from a meaningful football perspective that's going to help fans see more good games, or certainly see more different opponents from your conference roll through on a consistent basis. That's good. I'm with that mindset. I thought the ACC was doing a good thing and almost putting the SEC in a position to follow or look like they're going to be the lesser than ideal scheduling model from a conference standpoint. But then that Pac-12 Big Ten stuff happened, and now we're talking about, well, is the ACC even going to be a conference moving forward? Man, to me, that's wild. But now what's the next step? Because the conference, the Big Ten and the SEC, the conferences with the money, to me, hold all the power in this thing. I think another headline that I saw from Gene Sapikoff is that that Clemson, maybe Miami and North Carolina, I think you put, should basically hold the ACC hostage or go in and negotiate from a position of power, because knowing that they would seem very attractive, I would think, to either the Big Ten or the SEC right now. And so you got to, what can you do for me kind of thing? How can you make sure your conference continues? Because otherwise we gotta make a move. And the SEC with Clemson makes a lot of sense in a lot of ways, but that's where I have to, my line of thinking has to stop and say, well, that's not been the trend here recently. Missouri to the SEC didn't make much sense to me. Texas A&M to the SEC didn't make much sense to me at the time. Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, never saw that coming this time last year. Southern Cal and UCLA doesn't make any sense to me to the Big Ten. So I think what the SEC and the Big Ten have done recently has been the opposite of how we think about it logically. Like, okay, there's a lot that these schools have in common. They're close geographically. That would make sense to us, that they have a lot of shared values and the whole deal. Bring them on in. That hadn't been what's happened. At the same time, then you got Notre Dame floating out there, seemingly dealing with their own, like always, I guess, in their own orbit, making up their own rules, their own TV deals. They're good with NBC for a while. But I don't think their value will ever be higher than it is now. Do the leaders at Notre Dame agree, first of all? I doubt it. Because I think one of the prerequisites to be a leader at Notre Dame is you have to fundamentally believe that that school is different and more valuable and plays by different rules. So I don't know if there's going to be an adult in the room that stands up and says, hey guys, this is our opportunity to cash in. This will be our best opportunity to cash in, because I think you might get fired for thinking that at Notre Dame. But that's how I see it for sure. At this point, they could instantly revive the ACC's national reputation. Instantly solidify that conference, and I would call them, the minute that happens, it's the Power 3 now. ACC's back, baby. Maybe you add one other school with them, right, to get to 16, make it even. I don't know who that would be. Whoever it would be the other one. I don't care. Oregon, Washington, name your school. Stanford would probably make the most sense, right? In that it doesn't make any sense. But that's where we are in college conference realignment. They're the only one that I would see coming in and having any kind of argument with brand recognition and uniqueness, right? It would be Stanford. If the ACC added Stanford and Notre Dame, boom, we got the Power Three immediately. Pac-12, instantly dead. And Notre Dame, I think, from my standpoint anyway, I would start to appreciate them a lot more and resent them a lot less if they kind of got in line with everybody else and played by the same rules. And I got no confidence that's ever going to happen. And then how would the ACC fathom structuring that deal? Because there is no way Notre Dame's taking the same cut as Virginia, Wake Forest, NC State, Boston College. No way. So that's why I don't see that super conference idea as something that can happen, because I don't see Notre Dame getting in line with anybody. So maybe a two-team super conference with Notre Dame like popped out. And the Big Ten thing, I know you might be saying, well, what about Notre Dame and the Big Ten, right? It makes a ton of sense. Roger says, yeah, I still shake my head that how that was kept quiet with the two high-profile schools involved. I'm guessing he's talking about the most recent one, UCLA and Southern Cal, but you could say the same exact thing with Texas and Oklahoma, by and large. But so how does the Big Ten convince Notre Dame that, yeah, now's the time you need to join us? Just because Southern Cal and UCLA came in? And maybe if they reveal some kind of grand super conference plan of everyone else they're going to, maybe they go down and grab Clemson and Miami, right? Because that makes no sense. It makes about as much sense as Southern Cal and UCLA, right? To me. But from expanding the conference footprint and bringing other TV markets in and the whole thing, on paper, spreadsheet wise, I guess that makes sense. And the dollars would continue just to add up. You continue to just to cha-ching that thing. Maybe that would be what you have to do to convince a Notre Dame and show them, hey, all right, we know you guys are getting a certain $1 million amount with your deal with NBC. We can make that better because Fox has promised us our number is going to be this, because we're also adding A, B, C, and D, or whatever it is going to be the super conference deal. That's the only way I can see a Big Ten thing happening. But even still, I don't even know if those conferences feel comfortable. Just listening to, again, Hillary Cox, the associate AD, talk about, I asked her, what's the SEC doing to help schools with name, image, and likeness, or how is that relationship going? She's like, yeah, they talk, but it's still like they don't say a whole lot because they're recruiting against each other, still competing against each other. So you don't want to let everybody know what's working for you, because they're going to copy you, or they're going to take the best that you're doing and try to make it that much better and make it work for them, and that hurts you. So is the Big Ten even willing to pull back the curtain and say, check it out, Notre Dame, this is what we're doing here? Because then what's to stop the Notre Dame from going to the SEC and saying, hey, here's what we got over here. What do you guys got? Here's what's going to happen. I think it's so messy, man. It's so crazy, so cloak and dagger. And so much money involved and so many ramifications to come off of that. It's nuts. And again, I think Hillary told us yesterday, I think she said, if someone's telling you they know what's going to happen, then don't believe a word of it, because nobody knows at this point. That's where we are with college sports, but especially college football. And if no dominoes fall in the next several weeks, I just don't see that happening again, especially from the Pac-10-ish standpoint. Like, they got to figure out some kind of course of action pretty soon. Otherwise, the reputation just keeps taking a hit. The value of those schools, I think, just continues to fall if there isn't some kind of reinforcement plan. Or maybe it will be the clear sign that they don't have a good one. And again, I think that would continue to hurt their school's value, those schools' value, and they're not going to let that happen. Unless there really is no reinforcement plan out there, no attractive one, other than filling in their conference with some schools they know would be of lesser value and is something they're not willing to do yet. Such a crazy time, man. Crazy time for sure. Again, wanted to make sure that you knew Gamecock baseball adding a 9th transfer. Southern Miss second baseman Will McGillis hit 16 home runs last year for a team that ended up hosting a super regional. On paper, this makes sense with what I heard from Mark Kingston at his press conference about a week or so ago, that feels good about what's happening in the transfer portal. To me, this has been more of the exception than the rule of the 9 guys coming in, that the numbers are matching up. But Mark Kingston and his staff get paid to evaluate these guys and then to project what value they can bring to the program. So we'll see there. Talked a lot to Scott Eisberg down as the ABC sports director in Charleston about the College of Charleston baseball program now being investigated. Might not even be the correct word, but it seems like there has been a law firm hired, a Columbia law firm hired to investigate at least an allegation or something going on in the program that Chad Holbrook's in charge of, Mark Kingston's predecessor. So will be fascinating to see what, if anything, comes of that. And again, trying to be fair there. Just because there's smoke doesn't mean there's fire, and could totally be a disgruntled player making unfounded claims. No clue. But to know that the College of Charleston has been involved in multiple situations now, I think Scott pointed out 4 since 2014. Obviously not a good look for the athletics program. To me, kind of maybe says more about the culture of the athletics department or the school more than anything else. So I guess you could argue they're just 4 isolated incidents. Now 2 with the Chad Holbrook in the baseball program and Matt Heath suing them and saying that the AD, Matt Roberts, had basically kind of forced him out and talked to Chad Holbrook way too early. And Holbrook, even before he was out at South Carolina, had this deal in the works. A mess. And now you have we don't even know officially what they're looking into. I don't think College of Charleston said, just that they're investigating their baseball program. They're looking into it, and Chad Holbrook is cooperating. Odd situation. And the basketball situations, both on the men's and women's sides before, that led to Doug Wojcik being out. And that was a mess for sure in its own way. Not how you want to make the headlines in the state of South Carolina. Another baseball note, Braves losing last night in 11 innings. Cardinals ended up taking that one 3-2. That weird international rule that they're playing by now in Major League Baseball. I say weird because it's new. I am not necessarily against it. I think playing less 15-plus inning games, getting to a conclusion after several hours is a good thing. It's just different. So I should probably not even put it that way. Braves, though, back down to 3.5 back of the Mets. Mets won yesterday. Charlie Morton on the mound for Atlanta. The Washington Nationals coming into Truist Park there for a 3-game set. I think it is on the weekend. And the Nationals last in the NL East. So something to continue to follow there. We'll see if the Braves can bounce back, a series where they need to bounce back for sure to make sure they don't lose the ground they've now made up with the ridiculous June. I think it's something like 26-6 maybe in their last 32 games, something like that. So I think that's what we'll wrap up a few minutes early here today, unless you guys have any pressing questions or comments. Taking next week off, little family vacation for my clan, and then really looking forward to jumping back in. July 18th is the date. We'll do it on when SEC Media Days kicks off, and college football season will be in full swing from there, and things change in the state of South Carolina during football season, no doubt about it. And we will certainly, you will hear it in my voice, the in anticipation and enthusiasm picking up as we get closer and closer to football, as we'll talk more and more about the specifics on the field. We'll get more and more guests with more expertise than me to help us dissect exactly what we will see, what we have seen, and break it all down. But this time of year, when we really get to talk about football and get close to football season kicking off, one of the best times of the year for sure, because everybody's optimistic, or most are optimistic. There are a lot of reasons to be optimistic about football season for so many people, and we'll touch on a bunch of them here in the coming weeks on the show. Really appreciate you being a part of the live stream today. Let's see, especially those of you who have weighed in on the comment sections. Troy, most recently weighing in on the extra inning rule. If it had been in place in 1985, that greatest Major League Baseball regular season game of all time would not have happened. No doubt, Troy. It sounds like it might mean that you're not in favor of the international rule, and I get that. Roger, Teddy D, Colette weighing in with have a fun time with your family. York hitting us up this morning. Hope as well. All you guys. We had Spidey a little bit earlier on in DC. Double R. Joseph, Mr. Good morning from Charleston. My apologies there, Joseph. Thanks for hitting us up. We were up to Maryland, down in Charleston. I think that is the geography that I'm aware of today. Bunch in the Columbia area, I'm thinking. So we'll try to go even further. I mean, we did expand out to NHL draft comments today. I don't know how much more multifaceted we're going to get on the show than that. We're not, I don't think. But college football, we got Gene from New York. Nice work, Gene. So we're all the way up and down the East Coast today. Maybe we'll see if we can get some West Coast participation as we move forward here. And I don't think we've gotten any international participation on the show yet. We'll see if we can get the islands involved. I think we might have gotten an island before. I should put up a map or something. But right now, that's going to do it for this show, July 8th, 2022. Again, appreciate you being a part of the show. If you can, go subscribe and like and comment and all that stuff. Encourage others to do so the Tim Hill UFA stuff can grow and get to a point where it is that much more fun for all of us to do this each and every day. 8 to 10 live streaming, always archiving on YouTube and podcast platforms after that. Thanks for listening to Tim Hill, Unrestricted Free Agent today.